Welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kirti Patel. Here we place women's health and feminism front and center where they belong, engaging in conversations that range from the fundamental to the fearless. With insights from expert guests, we aim to break through the barriers of the patriarchy and envision a new world led by the Gynarchy. So let's get started and dive right in. Welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kirti Patel. And today we are going to be discussing a very important topic, intimate partner violence. So I just want to start with a trigger warning. We may be discussing some sensitive issues today. So this may not be an episode for everyone. So please use your own judgment. Okay. All right. So my wonderful guest today is Amy Kaufman. She is an advocate and a survivor of intimate partner violence. She's dedicated to raising awareness and supporting others in their journey to healing. She frequently shares her experiences and insights to empower and inspire those affected by domestic violence. And that is actually how I found her, tweeting some excellent information. So welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to finally meet you.
I know. That has been a really fun aspect of doing this because I just get to know people through their Twitter profiles and what their content there. And it's really nice to meet in person. Well, sort of, virtually.
Sort of, yeah.
So, Amy, I would love for you to share your story. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then whatever you're comfortable with sharing about your personal story. I just want to make sure to share with you and the audience that, I don't expect you to get too personal. And if you don't, whatever you're comfortable with. And this is also pre-recorded. So anything where you felt like you've overshared, you don't want to share publicly, I can edit out. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. So like 1 in 3 women, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I met my abuser around 7 years ago. And just as many of these relationships it started off wonderfully. And we were so in love. I finally found somebody who really saw me. I didn't have those usual relationship moments of, is he going to text me back? Does he really like me right from the get-go? This person was head over heels in love, wanted to spend all of his time with me. My mom had just passed away. And he sort of stepped in and provided all the support that anybody could ever want. We traveled. There were hotel rooms filled with flowers. It was so romantic. I didn't know it at the time, but now I do. The clinicians call this love bombing. It was a whirlwind. It was overly perfect. And very quickly, he decided he was going to be moving from Denver to Montreal into my condo. I only really realized now that this wasn't really something that was asked of me, but told to me. He was a very well-known sports journalist with a very large Twitter following who moved to Montreal. And once he moved to Montreal, I pretty quickly became pregnant and also didn't know that this is a very perfect time to trap somebody into an abusive relationship. I didn't know then that the leading cause of death among pregnant women is homicide, more than preeclampsia, more than anything else.
I see. Yes.
And the abuse started at first. It was something we call coercive control. So he was very controlling. He had moments of jealousy. He had outbursts. I was told at the time that he had never experienced anything like this. He thought he was losing his mind. He needed my help to get better. He thought he was suffering from mental illness. What I wasn't able to see at the time was that it was only towards me, which is something that people don't necessarily realize about these types of relationships. It was not an anger management problem, or else he would have had it while covering baseball games in the press box at work with his friends in traffic. It seemed as though he was out of control, but he was actually exerting control over me. He suggested that since I didn't love the job that I had, I leave it and become his podcast producer, which made it so that I was dependent on him for an income. He was living with me. and I was pregnant. And I was trying to help him. I was told by him that if he had cancer, I wouldn't leave him. And he needed my help to get better. He thought maybe he had a brain tumor. There were all of these theories floated as to what could be going on. And instead of getting help for myself, I tried to get help for him, which was a big mistake, but a very common one. And so things sort of vacillated between me being put on a pedestal and me being knocked off of it while pregnant. And it felt like torture, and things quickly became physical as well. The physical abuse became frequent, and I was stuck and pregnant. My life was being threatened. The life of my unborn baby was being threatened. And I finally understood why women don't leave. And prior to getting into this relationship, I say shamefully that I was one of the people who wondered what was wrong with her and why doesn't she just leave? And thought that the first time somebody raised their hand to me, I would be out. I have a good relationship with my dad. I have a good support system. I had had a career before. I was sure that this could never happen to me. And it did. And like so many victims, I felt a massive amount of shame. I was embarrassed. I didn't want to tell anybody. And luckily, my closest friend tuned into something being wrong. And I admitted it to her, which in the end probably saved my life. Fast forward, I had my baby. The abuse continued right up until the night before I delivered my baby, and started again within 5 or 6 days of me getting home from the hospital with the baby. I was in survival mode. I had no idea what to do. I started to do some research and realized that if I left, in the best case scenario, I would be sharing custody with an abuser who was threatening the life of my baby. So like a lot of survivors who are moms, I didn't feel comfortable leaving a burning building with my infant inside. And so I stayed. And things progressively got worse. And on July 17th of 2019, my abuser strangled me. And at that point, I had been keeping evidence because I was aware that this was not a situation that I would be able to extricate myself from very easily. I had read all the same horror stories as everyone else about the fact that 75% of femicides occur post-separation in these types of relationships. And so I was very lucky that when he strangled me, my dog, who's probably going to wander back and forth in the back screen, attacked him. I have the nicest dog in the world who rescued a cat, who you'll also see probably wandering in and out. She's good with babies and squirrels and cats, and attacked my abuser. I was able to get away, and I Googled being strangled by an intimate partner, and I'm glad I did, because I realized that I was 700 times more likely now to be murdered by him on the next attempt. That was enough for me. I called my best friend to tell her what had happened and told her that I was ready to leave, and asked her to please call my brother, and told her that in the morning I would be calling the police. I knew that it would not be safe to call the police in that moment and have them show up at the door with myself and my stepkids and my baby asleep in the house. I didn't know what my abuser would do. So I appeased him and told him, don't worry about it. I just need some space. Please go to your mom's in the morning. He left for his mom's, and I called the police. And that was the first step I took towards freedom. It was quite an uphill battle to get to where I am today. I worked in nonprofit afterwards. I was able to get through the court process very successfully due to a lot of support and a lot of privilege. And I am now remarried. I have sole parental rights and custody of what was then my baby and is now my almost 6-year-old. And I'm expecting a baby in the fall, and it's a very, very different pregnancy. So,
wow. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yes.
What a story. And I'm so happy that you're in a good place now.
Thank you.
My goodness, I have so many thoughts, so many questions. Oh, and I see your pets. I saw your dog earlier.
Oh, the dog's on the floor behind me. She's never far.
I think
and there's a cat wandering. Yes, that's Pedro. He's wandering around. So
very cute. So, my goodness, you experience multiple types of abuse. And that is something I wanted to talk about because I think some are really overt and obvious, like you said, like choking, physical, hitting, throwing objects. And then some other ways they're overt is like verbal abuse, yelling and screaming. But you experience some more subtle types. And that's something I wanted to talk about because I think that a lot of women are in abusive situations and they don't realize that they are. So, besides physical abuse, verbal abuse, you also experienced psychological and emotional abuse. It sounds like you experienced some financial abuse.
Definitely.
Right? Oh, another thing that I found interesting was he has children that you were living with.
They were living with us for the summer. They lived with us part-time, and I'm very lucky that I've gotten to keep a relationship with them because their mom, who I refer to as my fellow ex-wife, became one of my closest friends, and she was the bridesmaid at my wedding, and she'll be flying in for the birth of my next child in October, which is a really awesome, bright thing to come from this horrible situation. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, so, using children to manipulate is another type of abuse. And
Absolutely.
I hope doesn't have custody of those children. Okay. Okay. And how wonderful to hear that you're friends with with his other ex, because yes, you've both lived through something together. You can, I'm sure many commonalities in your story. So another thing I thought was interesting from going back all the way to the beginning of your story was the love bombing part. I think it's hard. I think where a lot of women are, we are kind of romance pilled, right? And that's what we want from men is that incredible romance. But how do you feel like there's a way to tell when it's real and it's not real? Like, how can you tell what's too good to be true?
Yeah, this is a conversation I've had with a lot of people, and it would be great if we could tell. I would love to say that I could not fall for love bombing again. It was too good to be true. I did have a sense of that. I wrote myself actually a note after he told me that he was going to be moving to Montreal, saying, "This feels too good to be true. This is the biggest leap of faith I've ever taken. I hope that I'm not wrong about this."
Wow.
So I did have a sense of something. No one else has ever liked me this much. Was sort of a bit of a sense of it. And it was very much like out of a movie or a fairy tale, or, it was just perfect. The pieces all fell together. But I don't think that the onus is on victims to be able to spot abusers. It's sort of similar, I've realized, to like the grooming process in whether you want someone to join a cult or whether you want someone to join a gang. I was in a very vulnerable position. My mom and I had been very close. She had been sick for an extended period of time. I took care of her. She passed away, and I was sort of rudderless at that time. And it was a very easy time to come in and sweep me off there. The two of them are wrestling. Sorry if you can hear the animals growling at each other. Okay, great.
I actually can't. It's totally okay. I love it. I love seeing the cat.
It's cute. Yeah, it's like a little Disney movie behind me. Yeah, so I was sort of ripe for picking for an abuser at that time. And I will often speak with other survivors who say the same thing. There's not really any way that I could have known. And unfortunately, we're not educated in school by society about anything other than the physical abuse. So once it became physical, I knew that this was abusive. I knew that this was against the law. I knew that this was wrong, that this was appalling, and that I was lucky that I did know that I did not deserve it. I did not have a period of time of thinking that I did. But until it became physical, I didn't recognize any signs of abuse. What was the difference between emotional abuse or verbal abuse and a bad temper? I didn't know.
Right. I think that's so important. Such a good point, because the obvious forms of abuse, most women would recoil from that. And these subtle forms, I mean, the other thing that you mentioned that I thought was powerful was him kind of gaslighting you with, his woes and concerns about his health. And so your natural good-hearted tendency to show concern for your partner came out, and it weakened you from protecting yourself, right?
Absolutely. And I had also been caregiving for my mom for so long that it was sort of a comfortable role to find myself in this position of taking care of somebody else. And when the gaslighting and the love bombing are sort of taking turns occurring, and one day you're the most wonderful, amazing person in the world, and the next day you're awful, it's completely destabilizing. And so the process of sort of priming you for the abuse that occurs before it begins makes it so that when the physical abuse starts, you don't have all of your faculties. You're not in a position of feeling strong and feeling confident in yourself. You're being told that what you thought happened didn't really happen. You're not sleeping very much. There were many days at a time where I was kept awake all night, listening to insults or being abused. And I was not the same person that I am today or that I was before I met him when the physical abuse started. But we could do a much better job of educating society about what a healthy relationship looks like and what a relationship looks like when it's abusive before it becomes physical, because the emotional and psychological abuse was just as damaging as the physical abuse. It was just less obvious.
Wow. One question I had is, how quickly did this progress? As you mentioned, it was relatively quickly that he wanted to move to where you were in Montreal. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it progressed within a year, within the first year of the relationship. And really, once I was pregnant, it progressed extremely quickly and became very dangerous, very bad, very quickly, which in a way made it, if this had been going on for 20 years, I don't know how easy it would have been for me to leave. I still had some semblance of myself, of a support system, of friends who hadn't given up yet. So there are many different sort of forms of abuse and ways that it starts and ways that it presents itself. And as awful as it was, and the prosecutor who worked on my file referred to it as intimate partner terrorism, because it had occurred so quickly and it was so violent and it was so obvious just where this was going, that there was no way for me to think like, oh, maybe it's not that bad. I knew just how bad it was. I just had no idea how to get out, which is what so many survivors I've spoken to who are still in the relationship know, that they should leave, but how?
Right. You feel trapped. Something you mentioned earlier, which I think is important, is that you had this gut feeling. I really believe in that, women's intuition and gut feeling, and listening to that. And I think we need to also encourage more of that, like your inner intelligence, emotional intelligence of women. And again, I'm not blaming you, because I think it's so easy to be swept up by a charming man, right? But I do like that you mentioned that you did write a note to yourself, that you did think like, this is different, unusual. I don't know about this. I'm scared, something like that, of that nature.
Yeah, it was different. It was unusual. I mean, it felt good. It was wonderful to have somebody see you and love you. And, if he left the condo to go to the gym downstairs for 45 minutes, he texted me the entire time he was gone. My brother used to joke that he would text me when he took the garbage out to tell me he missed me. There were people in my life also, like my best friend, who were not charmed by him, and who pretty much the first time she met him, she was like, don't you think this is a lot? He's kind of making speeches to all of us and professing his love for you. And why does he come every time we see you? And why does he drive you everywhere? And I was like, oh, he knows I hate parallel parking, so he drives me. And she was like, yeah, this isn't normal. He doesn't have anything of his own. Some people were very charmed because he was well known. And, he was a good talker and could be very kind and sweet and gregarious. My brother also pretty quickly, I met him through my brother. My brother's a journalist as well. And my brother loved him, thought he was amazing, and very
Wow.
quickly soured on him and said, I think there's
Oh,
something wrong here. Please don't get pregnant. And
wow.
I was already pregnant, but I didn't know it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find this aspect of your story interesting that he moved to you because
Mhm.
I've taken care of many women over the years, and the story is usually, yes, isolation is very important for these abusers because they can create their own reality for you away from your friends and family and support system, your normal environment. So I find it interesting that he moved to you, and yeah, but I guess he got around the control aspect by just never leaving you alone.
By never leaving me
Right.
alone. And I also think like I wasn't moving to Denver. I had
Mhm.
offered early on, he had children, but I did have a life and friends and
Mhm.
a business here at the time.
Mhm.
And I said, you shouldn't leave and let's stay together and keep dating and do this long distance. And in the year or a year and a half, I can move there. That was not good enough.
Wow.
This was an
Yeah.
instant gratification thing.
I think that's an element I've heard too, the quickness of trying to lock you down, right?
Yeah.
And the pregnancy, unfortunately, is a very swift way to lock down and entrap a woman, right?
Right. Right. I've heard other survivors say it's a life sentence. You can leave
Mhm.
them, but if
Right.
you're going to be sharing custody
Right.
and worrying about your children and enduring post-separation abuse and going through 15-year court processes
Mhm.
and having your children be traumatized, you're not really fully leaving.
Right. I'm so
Um,
happy for you that you got full custody and you don't have to deal with that as much, sharing custody with an abuser or someone manipulative.
Yeah, well, I'm in like the top 0.5% in that I didn't just get full custody, but I was able to have his parental rights terminated, which
Wonderful.
is like a new
Wonderful.
lease on life. My child was
Yes.
an infant when I left. He calls
Yeah.
my current husband dad and has a
Mm.
brother and is about to have a sister in the fall. And this is not his reality. And I was able to get away and end this relationship in all forms. This is not someone I will ever have to communicate with again. And
That's amazing.
it's amazing
How,
and it should
I
be more
mean,
common.
I know. How do we make that happen? Why? What were the things do you think that helped you achieve that?
Yeah, well, it's pretty interesting how I was able to achieve that. So I had been in the relationship, there was a lot of back and forth over text message. There were a lot of abusive text messages. I started to, when he would apologize, he would apologize by text and I would say, "What are you sorry for?" And I would sort of coax him into acknowledging what he did in writing. I
Mm-hmm.
started to videotape abusive incidents, record him as well on my phone, and send evidence to my best friend every day so that if he erased
Mm-hmm.
anything in my phone or looked through my phone, which he did
Amazing.
regularly, he wouldn't be able to get rid of them. There was a video there was a camera in the elevator of my condo building. And a few days before we got married, actually, which is insane to me saying it,
Wow.
he followed me into the elevator and bit me and hit me
Mm-hmm.
and threw me on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And then proceeded to go upstairs into the condo and record a live video for CBS Sports and be perfectly fine. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and I did not think to call 911. My only thought was how embarrassed I was because I knew that the
Mm-hmm.
doorman saw it. But I was very lucky that my building manager saved that, and that became evidence. So when I first called the police after he had strangled me, the police pressed two charges for strangling and pushing me before strangling me. The strangling charge is assault or aggravated assault.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Well, I have my phone and I have evidence of probably 60 or 70 other abusive incidents over the last year." And
Mm-hmm.
the police were like, "Yeah, every woman or person that calls who experiences abuse has evidence in their phone. We don't have the means to sort through your phone and authenticate evidence and do all of this," which none of us realize that this is not law and order. And when we're a
Wow.
victim of a crime, the police don't have the ability to spend 6 months investigating your situation. So they said, we'll press 2 charges. I spoke with a lawyer who was like, yeah, with 2 charges, it's probably going to get dropped. Nothing much is going to happen. Family lawyer was like, it's going to be 50-50 custody. I was panicked. I was very lucky to have support and access to resources. And the lawyer finally said, well, you can hire a digital forensic specialist who can go through your phone and try to get all the relevant information off of it. There were emails, there were hundreds of thousands of pieces of relevant information on my phone. He took it all off, and the digital forensic specialist, who has since become a really close friend of mine, said to me, there are like 200,000 messages and audio clips and photos.
Crazy.
And I don't know how you're going to go through all of this. It's going to take you the rest of your life. I'm so sorry. This is the best I can do. I can print it out and give you a highlighter. I had a 6-month-old baby. I had just escaped an abusive relationship. I had no idea what to do. I was referred to a criminal lawyer who spent 6 months with me at my dining room table for 6 or 7 hours a day. And we poured through every piece of evidence and made piles of what was relevant for criminal court, what was relevant for family court. Went back to the police, and the police were like, oh, okay, yeah, this would be 18 charges. So what went from 2 charges became 18 charges. There was evidence. My abuser was not able to say she's making it up. This didn't happen. It was all in his own words. And that was when things really started to change. I benefited a lot from his fame in this case. He was famous enough that it garnered a lot of attention. Certainly on Twitter, there was it went viral, and that caused the media to pick it up. It also caused him to lose his employment, which doesn't usually happen with abusers. And he lost his employment. He lost his sort of adoring fans, and he lost his power very quickly. And so the media attention caused, I believe, me to get, senior prosecutors working on the case. The police treated me properly. Also, unfortunately, being a cisgendered white woman helped a lot, which is not the way that it's supposed to work. And so I was in a much better position than most people. And so once he lost his power, that was sort of when the roles reversed, and I was able to get a successful outcome in court. The prosecutor, I'm in Canada, so we are not as carceral as in the United States, which I do agree with, but the prosecutor asked for 12 months in prison. The judge gave him 21 months. So that's quite unusual for here. The judge really understood the situation. My ex presented 14 letters, I believe, of support to the judge, which is often the case that people, from
coworkers and.
Well, people were really curious because that came out in the media, and people were like, I want to know which sports writer supported him. And I'll say that none of them did. It was his high school friends and his mom and his stepmom.
Okay.
And I said to the prosecutor, who told me in advance there are 14 letters of support about what a wonderful person he is. And I said, will that work? And he said, often, yes. It will sway a judge. Instead, I had a judge who was extremely informed about intimate partner violence, who said that the 14 letters worked against my ex. He said it showed how insidious this was. It showed that this happens behind closed doors. And the judge was most appalled that none of the letters showed any concern for me. And instead talked about how proud they were of him, that he had already turned his life around and rebuilt so quickly. And so that worked against him as well. He was sentenced to jail time. The family court issues resolved themselves. I had very good lawyers. I was able to show all of this abuse. He was, given probation and conditions not to come near myself or my child. And so about a year ago, I was able to go to court and say, my child doesn't know this person. This person was abusive. Here is all of the evidence. We're very lucky to be alive. The judge's first reaction was, I can't sign something terminating a parent's rights. And my lawyer said, if you could please allow my client to just speak for a few minutes. I got up and spoke, and the judge was like, it would be my honor to sign this document and terminate these parental rights. So, and that was really, for me, the only thing that mattered. If I had been told while I was pregnant, that you can terminate his parental rights. You'll be safe. Your child will be safe. Your child won't have to be damaged or harmed or worse by this person.
Mhm.
That would have made all the difference. I did not know that things could work out this well.
That's amazing. My goodness, that's so inspiring. And thank you for sharing that, because I do think most women do not have this sort of outcome. And it is,
They don't.
I also appreciate you recognizing your privilege. I mean, it's strange to say because, my goodness, you've been through a lot. So it's strange to say that, but it's true that other women would not be as listened to, aren't with such prominent individuals that they garner so much media attention. And they do have to share custody with abusers and worry about their children. They may be free in some sense, but the impacts on children are great, raised by people like this, mental health problems and aggression, behavioral issues, and then they have an increased risk of repeating this type of violence in their own lives when they're adults. So it is such a great impact on society. We should be encouraging more of this, more losing of parental rights if you're this type of person, right? It's a bad influence on children.
At best, it's a bad influence on children. There was a law that I helped work on that my friend, Dr. Jen Kagan, who's a survivor as well, had spearheaded in Canada, making it so that judges would have to acknowledge intimate partner violence when making custody decisions and receive training about intimate partner violence before making these decisions. And that law is called Kira's Law, which was unfortunately named after Dr. Kagan's daughter, Kira, who was murdered by her father after her mom left, and a judge refused to acknowledge that intimate partner violence has anything to do with children. Because a lot of judges say this happened between mom and dad. This is a high conflict case. Fathers have a right to their children. Children have a right to their father, which in many cases is true, but not when the father is threatening the life of the child or the mom. When one parent experiences intimate partner violence, the children experience it as well. And that's what we should realize as society.
Right. And I think that often these types of people, abusers, are using the children as tools, really, just to continually control you. And so it sounds like, from what you were saying, document. And also, you had access to a forensics researcher, and obviously, the other thing that this just points out to me is, God, the expense, Are there organizations that can help women with this? Like the documenting part sounds very smart to do if you're in this sort of a relationship, and you can do that. I love how you were texting your friends screenshots and things like that. But when it comes to legally taking action, that's quite expensive. Are there organizations that might help people with this?
There are organizations and legal clinics that help people. There's legal aid, but you run out of hours very quickly. Unfortunately, this cost me many hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
So that is not accessible to most people. And I have yet to find any organizations that can help people to do this type of work. Again, I spent 6 or 7 hours a day for 6 months with a lawyer working on it. Lawyers have to eat too, and can't give you this type of time. And, even the lawyer who I worked with, who was extremely kind, but said to me, I didn't go to law school to read your text messages. Like, it was traumatic for him as well. We used to take breaks, and the guy used to lie on the floor because it was so awful to read all of this. But something that I'm working on now with some people who work in technology, I've been working for the last year on it, is a way. When I met my husband, who was a former CTO and a startup guy, and explained the story to him, he was like, this doesn't make any sense. What do you mean you couldn't just find them in your phone? This took 7 months. This is done. Like, they can call through large, huge millions of pieces of data for corporations. Why was there no one that could help you? And it's just because this isn't a priority in our society. But we're working to create a platform that would allow people to plug their phones in, explain their situation, to use AI for some good, and say, I was in an abusive relationship. this is the name of the person. These are some of the words that they use. These are some of the themes, and have it find those messages and help you to build a timeline to be able to go to the police and say, here you go, and to have shelters and nonprofits have access to that so that you don't have to have money to get out of these relationships safely.
I love this. I love this, Amy. A good use of AI.
Yeah,
and you need to keep me posted on this because I will help you promote it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Since leaving, and this garnered a ton of media attention when I called the police, within 3 hours, my brother was in my house and said to me, don't, I wouldn't go on Twitter if I were you. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, it's gone viral. In good news, he's been suspended from his jobs, my abuser, not my brother, luckily, but this has gone viral and it's everywhere. And of course, curiosity killed the cat. I went on Twitter, went upstairs, went on Twitter immediately, and was shocked that there were no tweets from anyone questioning whether this had happened, despite the fact that my ex was a very strong advocate for abusers being removed from Major League Baseball. He was came across as a feminist, like the really nice guy, but people believed this, which is so rare, and it really doesn't usually happen. And people were tweeting CBS and Sportsnet saying, if you don't get rid of this guy, I'm unsubscribing. And
I'm so happy for you that you were believed.
I was believed, which is, again, unfortunately, you can chalk up to privilege. I was at a point in my life.
Was there evidence that the public saw? Is that what helped?
Not for a year and a half or 2 years. No.
Wow. Yeah. That is rare, I feel like. And especially these prominent people, so many people will come out of the woodwork defending them, and for years. And it takes years for us in the public, like the Diddy story. My God, for us to see, it's almost like we have to see it to believe a woman. It's terrible.
Yeah, that was one of the tweets that sort of people at the beginning shared, was a tweet that my ex had written saying, why is it that we require a video in order to believe a woman when she says she's abused by a prominent athlete?
We shouldn't need that?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I mean,
yes.
That is another thing that's really interesting, is often these prominent abusers are often doing things that are, you're right, like you said, feminist, and defending women, or getting into charities, that are like opposing sex trafficking and things like that, which I find kind of fascinating. It's what, I don't understand the psychology behind it. That would be probably a great thing to talk about in another episode. Do you have any insight into that?
I mean, I thought that at first as well. And in working in nonprofit and working in advocacy, I had this sort of, anytime a male colleague who was working as well to try to help survivors of domestic violence would reach out to me, I would say to one of my female colleagues, do you think he's an abuser, or do you think his dad abused his mom? And because of my ex, but what I've just come to realize is that there are all types of abusive men. Some of them are feminists, some of them are not. They work in all different jobs. They come from all sorts of backgrounds and socioeconomic situations. And it would be really easy if you could just say, oh, all advocates for women that are male are abusive. They're not. There are a lot of men who are involved in this because they care, because they have sisters or moms who went through it, or just because they're human beings who have educated themselves about the issue and then gone on to devote their lives to helping people. So it's not that simple. It really seems to cross all barriers of society who can be abusive. But it was definitely startling. He didn't seem like he was going to be an abuser, but they don't.
Right. They never do, I bet. So another thing I wanted to touch upon, and you do not have to share your medical history, but I do want to just talk about the long-term effects on women. There's the obvious, physical harm you may suffer from the trauma, the physical abuse or sexual abuse. But then there's the psychological effects. There's a higher risk of mental health problems in survivors. more trouble with like relationships going forward, higher risk of suicide, PTSD, anxiety, depression. Other health issues like chronic pain is higher in these patients, sometimes long-term financial impacts and overall less quality of life. So I think we as a society should address this. It's not just a, problem for women, relationships, choosing the wrong men. We're often blamed. Women are blamed, but it is a societal problem. And so I guess that's what I want to address, like your thoughts about the long-term impacts on women, and also like what can we do to kind of, bring this to people as a problem we need to solve. What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, the long-term effects, I would be lying if I said that I don't experience long-term effects and I don't have scars, emotional scars because of this. My marriage lasted less than a year. And I think in many ways that was the difference between my being able to rebuild as quickly as I was on top of support. And because this was outed publicly, I was forced to be in a situation where everybody knew. A lot of people keep this quiet. I'm sure I would have as well if this hadn't leaked to the media within an hour while I was asleep after he was arrested. But because I was outed, I had so many strangers reach out to me on Twitter, by email, to say, I've been through this. I've been in the trenches. I can help you out. Do you want to talk? Here's my story. Here's my phone number. I had advocates. I had experts. I had lawyers. All these people were reaching out to try to help. And it made me realize that I wasn't alone. I was in good company. Once the court situation was settled, I was able to call a really well-known Canadian journalist, Anna Maria Tremonti, who so bravely had released her own podcast about the intimate partner violence she had experienced 30 years before, and have her say, okay, well, I'm retired now, but I'll come back and do an interview with you, which was extremely generous and kind of her. And I was able to take back my power and tell my story. It was incredibly empowering. I had positive outcomes in court. I kept my child. I kept my home. It was an awful situation, but the road was paved for me. So few survivors experience that. And they say that like trauma changes your brain, and it absolutely does. But I really believe that healing changes your brain as well. And so many survivors aren't able to heal because they don't have access to any of those things. And if we could remove the stigma and remove the shame from the victim and place it where it belongs, on the perpetrator.
Yes.
And give her access to the resources that she needs to rebuild her life, and make it so that she is not continuing to experience abuse by proxy through her children. I believe that there would be a lot more positive stories that came out, because these are really formidable people who've experienced this. I say to I hear from around 10 people a day who are either in abusive relationships or who have left. And I always say the same thing, which is like, this is not a club that any of us wanted to join, but we're in really good company. And there are a lot of survivors out there who generously share their stories, and at great personal expense, because it's hard to do, but share their stories and help others. Peer support is incredibly helpful. Just telling somebody. There are so many women, especially who've been through this, who've never told anybody in their whole lives, who went through this 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And I've often said that, like, if every person that experienced intimate partner violence, and men experience it, folks in the LGBTQS plus community experience it at much higher rates than anybody else. But if we were aware of just how many of us had experienced this, it would be staggering, because it's just a huge portion of society, and you're not alone. And when I was going through it, I felt completely alone. And that, things are a lot scarier in the dark.
Yes. I mean, you mentioned earlier in the beginning, 1 in 3 women, it's something like 35%, and worldwide experience intimate partner violence. It's actually very common. And I love, you are so brave, and women like you are so brave to share your story. I do think that's a very strong element in in helping others to come out and escape their situations. So thank you for that. Another aspect of your story that I found really great for you, which I think a lot of people don't have, is you mentioned that your friends and family kind of quickly realized who he was, because they are often very charming. And in a way, I've also seen like people like this, or heard people like this, will charm everyone around the person and make the victim the problem. And even their friends and family will turn on the victim. So that's remarkable that you had that support. What advice can you give women, that are feeling isolated and that they can't share with others? They can't share with their friends and family. They're afraid to go to law enforcement because they'll be further victimized.
Yeah, it's a really, really big problem. People need to remember that the abuser is in control and the victim is out of control. So often the abuser still comes across charming and as though he's great at parties, and she seems kind of bitchy and she seems angry all the time. And is she mentally ill? She's kind of not all there. And it also sets up a perfect situation where the woman looks insane. My ex used to say to me, I probably won't have to kill you because I can make you kill yourself and I'll make everybody realize how insane you really are. Reaching out to that one friend for me made all of the difference. If you can find one person that you can talk to, and that person can be on the internet. There are groups on Facebook that are anonymous for people who are in these relationships. I had an anonymous pen pal online at the time, a woman who had escaped abuse, who I was emailing back and forth with. She didn't know my name. I didn't know hers. But you can stay sane by having one person that you can speak with if you can do so safely. I believe that speaking openly with my best friend saved my life. Her husband and her came to my wedding, and her husband handed me an envelope with $1,000 in it. And I said, with a check, and I said, it's just to me. It's not to my ex, to my husband as well. And he said, yeah, it's for your first hour with the lawyer. So I was very aware that everyone in my life wanted me out of this relationship.
Yes.
And we should really do a better job as a society of supporting victims, of supporting our friends when they go through these things. And it's something that I often say on Twitter, but when like a Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing happens, or Puff Daddy, whatever he calls himself today, comes out, like Amber Heard is probably not going to read your tweet, but a victim of domestic violence will.
Right.
And the conversations that we have with our friends in restaurants, and the conversations we have at work, and the things that we tweet about, someone is listening who is experiencing domestic violence, and you might make it harder for them to leave. The odds are already stacked against them. They know it. So the way that we speak about these issues, the way that we think about these issues, and myself included before this happened to me, of like, well, why didn't she just leave? What's wrong with her? It's not what's wrong with her. It's what's wrong with him.
Thank you.
We need to do better as a society.
I love that. I love that advice, because I do feel like some people feel that they don't have a single friend in the world, a single supporter. And what you said is so true. There are people online, there are support groups online, and you can find support. There are others like you out there, right? And I do agree with that point. Like, I'm an Amber Heard supporter. I'm an Angelina Jolie supporter.
Yes.
Pretty much, Cassie supporter. Anytime these stories come out, I do like to share them, because we do need to change the narrative. We need to believe women and show other women who are going through this that we are going to believe them, So thank you so much. We are running out of time. So let me see. I'm trying to think if there was something else I wanted to touch upon. I guess I should share. I did write this down because I do want to share for anybody listening out there. If, this is for the US. If you are experiencing what you feel is intimate partner violence, you can reach out to the National Domestic Abuse Hotline. That is 1-800-799-SAFE, SAFE, or 7233. Or you can text START, START, to 888-788. And if you are listening internationally, I found, at least online, that Women's Aid International offers support, info, and resources. Do you have additional advice for anyone listening?
There are so many wonderful organizations that are all very available online. One of the best things I did was to follow survivors and intimate partner violence organizations on Twitter when I was going through it, on Facebook, on Instagram, and to educate yourself about what you're going through and to tell somebody if you can. It will keep you safer. And it might keep you sane as well. But there are resources out there. There are people who've been through this, and there are people who will help you to get out of it. And as much as you feel stuck, you're not stuck forever. And that, again, while trauma changes your brain, healing does as well. And this doesn't have to be your life story.
Yes, I want to just tell you, thank you. Well, thank you first for sharing your story with me. And I'm so happy for you, so happy for your new life. And I hope you stay continually blessed. And I look forward to seeing what you do going forward. Can you please share with my audience where they can find you if they'd like to follow you, listen to you?
I guess my Twitter is probably the best place to do it. And it's at Amy Kaufman 84. The rest of my social media is kind of private and for pictures of dogs and kids. So Twitter is a good place to start.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So I always leave with a closing thought. And today is that the patriarchy's success very much relies on the abuse and oppression of women to control women, their reproductive potential, and also to extract free labor from women. And in the Gynarchy, we know that women deserve to live lives of freedom from abuse, from control, and to live their lives to their fullest potential on their own terms. So down with the patriarchy and up with the Gynarchy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. You have a wonderful day. Appreciate your time. Did you enjoy this episode of the Gynarchy Podcast? Know someone else that might enjoy this conversation? Make sure to subscribe and share the show with your friends and family. Find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and just about anywhere you find podcasts. On social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at The Gynarchy. Thank you so much for listening.